Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. Everyone, welcome to today's episode of Elemental Energy. I am so happy to be joined by another woman who fully supports STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Another woman who is also a nuclear advocate, and another woman who is Miss America 2023. Grace, I'm so thankful to have you on Elemental Energy. Welcome, and I'm excited for our conversation. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself further?
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's always that's such like a hype up introduction. I love it. I am a nuclear engineering student at UW-Madison right now. I am in my final semester with my final class. I spaced everything out for my last semester throughout my year as Miss America. So as Miss America, a lot of people don't know that it's not just a one-time competition. It's not just one night. Once you become Miss America, it is a full-time job, and I have traveled just under 200,000 miles since January in terms of air travel and everything, going across the entire country and the world now, working on grassroots advocacy with nuclear energy and nuclear medicine overall. So working with second graders and kindergartners and high schoolers and college students and local politicians and nursing home residents, literally anyone and everyone to talk about what nuclear science is and what it does in our community. But I also work on the other end of the advocacy side, I guess, when it comes to policy development. I firmly believe in having a youth voice involved in policy discussions that are happening right now, because when you make plans for 2050, the people who are making the plans right now aren't going to be around. So it's important to have youth involved in all of those discussions, as we'll be the ones carrying out some of these plans.
Oh, that is phenomenal. So I'm very thankful to hear you say that you're connecting with the youth on this, because I'm going to let you in on something really quickly. You're the first woman that I have had on my podcast, and it's not for lack of trying.
Wow. I'm shocked. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not for lack of trying. I have like kind of a specific curation way of doing things, and I've tried to see what women could come in and speak about some of these subjects, but we're in a predominantly male field, right? I mean, how do you feel knowing that and entering that wholeheartedly? You're like, yes, I'm going to be the woman in this field. How do you stand up proud and recognize that we deserve a space at the table?
There's a lot of just self-confidence that it comes from, right? I struggled a lot with confidence growing up, and I'll be honest, competing in Miss America actually helped me a ton with developing that. But I've also, once I got into the industry, the thing that I've learned that I find the most valuable when it comes to diversity and inclusion and everything is the best teams are made up of people who come from different backgrounds and are confident in who they are. Meaning they're seeing things from a different perspective and a different point of view, whether they grew up differently, whether they grew up from a different background, whatever it might be. It's a difference in perspectives that's so highly valued that I've found, because if we had teams that were comprised of people with the same opinion, there wouldn't be much discussion. There wouldn't be identifying of weaknesses. There wouldn't be improvements to make on the product, right? The best teams are made up of different people that aren't afraid to call out errors or mistakes or flaws. And I've really found that to be valuable, knowing that when I go to work as an engineer, right, is realizing that not everybody sees the world through the same lens, and it's important to show that.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Some of the most impactful projects I have been on have truly been the strongest because of the diversity that joint minds bring to the table. So I appreciate that insight, Grace. Okay. I always like to ask the same question, honestly, to every one of my guests, and it's about climate change, just because it's such a polarizing topic. I would love to know your stance on climate change, and what proofs and science did you made you recognize that climate change was real?
Yeah, so it's actually a fun story. I'm from the Midwest. I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and there was a couple things growing up that made me realize, that climate change is affecting me. First of all, I love going to national parks, right? And Glacier National Park is hands down my favorite national park in Montana. It's stunning, it's beautiful. If you ever have the opportunity to go, go. And I have been there 3 times now in my life. The first, I'll be honest, I was pretty young. I don't really remember that time. The second time I was, I believe, like 11 or 12 years old. And then the third time I was about 17. Now, there was a big shift in one of the hikes that I love to do. It's called Iceberg Lake. Highly, highly recommended. It's a good day hike, so pack your lunch and everything. But the first time I was there when I was 12, I went in July. So it was pretty late in the summer, right? Most of the snow is kind of melted. And Iceberg Lake is popular because it has icebergs on it throughout the whole summer. And went there when I was 12. You saw all the icebergs and everything. My brother went swimming in the lake. It was a great time and all of that. When I went back when I was 17, all of a sudden there was only 2 icebergs in the lake. And and it was in early June when I went to that year. So we should have seen more. And that was like a very real kind of impact for me, seeing, one of these special places and special hikes that I love to do and is a big part of my childhood in a way, see how it pivotally changed throughout time. Additionally, when it comes to the scientific side of things, I went to the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. Oh, actually really wasn't that long ago. And they show this progression of carbon in the atmosphere that goes back about 1 million years. And I think this was a traveling exhibit at the time. So I don't know if it's still there, unfortunately. But I remember seeing, there is some natural variation in carbon. But all of a sudden, as soon as humans created electricity and started industrializing society, it skyrocketed. And from there, I'm like, okay, so this is not a natural progression. It's something that we as human beings, what my personal beliefs about everything is we as human beings are accelerating climate change. I think there is some level of natural change in the weather and in the environment, but I believe we are accelerating it. And I am a believer that we will not win the battle against Mother Earth. She will win. So I have really become involved in some ways with America's transition to zero carbon energy, with talking about nuclear energy and all of these things to help reduce carbon emissions. But it also is a conversation about reliable energy, too. No matter where you stand on climate change, I think one thing that we can all agree on as Americans is we need reliable electricity and we need affordable electricity. And nuclear is something that fits those two things, and zero carbon as well. So it's pretty great.
Oh, yes, yes. And so, fun fact for everybody listening, when Grace was talking about how the earth like goes in cycles with climate, a lot of it has to do with our flora and fauna and what seasons we go through and where the trees are abundant and how they are actually absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's a beautiful cycle, and it's a very sensitive cycle. And when we mess with it, which we are by putting more emissions into the atmosphere, it can't really balance itself out as well. So that is an excellent way of producing facts on climate change. I appreciate you sharing that one. So I brought you in to talk nuclear. We've already started that journey, and it's really important to talk about this because I want people to understand how it's safe. So can you go through and explain just why nuclear is considered to be safe?
Yeah, so historically, I will say we have a track record that makes us one of the safest forms of energy production in the energy industry overall. And a lot of people ask, well, what about Chernobyl? What about Fukushima? What about 3 Mile Island? But that's it. That's all you know. And that's 60 years of global operating history. I personally, I hate to do like the argument of let's compare apples to apples and everything. But compare those 3 major disasters all combined into one and compare it just to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. More people died in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill than all 3 of those nuclear disasters combined. And that's something that I think is important to recognize as what the media capitalizes on and what we are taught is sometimes not necessarily the truth about, what things actually are. So if you're going to treat one industry one way, make sure to treat all of them that way when you're comparing them. So when it comes to safety, we are a proven track record to be safe, effective operations. Here in America, there are 94 nuclear reactors, and they create 20% of America's electricity. That's incredible. We've been doing that for 60 years, and it's probably powering your home and you don't even know it, which is really awesome. When it comes to working in a plant, I want to share my experiences from when I worked at a company. They operate 12 different nuclear power plants across the country. So I was 17 years old when I first started working with this company. I just started my degree. I really didn't know what was, I honestly knew very little about nuclear energy and engineering overall. And they asked me to write this code to go into a program that would be implemented into all 12 power plants. And listen, I was scared when I finished the code and was like, are we sure about this? Like, are we really sure? Because I'm 17 and I just started my degree last year. Like, are we really, really sure about sending this in? And here's what reassured me, because I was just as questionable as I think, probably most of the listeners are when you have a 17-year-old person that's just trying a coding project for this. I went through and did a self-review of this. Couldn't find any errors. I did as much rigorous testing and attempting to break it as much as I could. And when I couldn't get it to fail anymore, I went to my mentor and I said, hey, listen, I think I've got it all, good, figured out. I think it's solid. Then my mentor did a review of it. When he had the same result, then we went to my boss and my boss did a review of it. And then we sent it to someone outside of the group entirely that doesn't know me, doesn't know my work, and they reviewed it. And only when all four of us agreed and said, yes, this looks good, there's, a very low chance of failure, or, there's a very low risk, then we all sat down and said, we need to consider that risk though. What is worst case scenario if this goes wrong, and are we ready for it? And until the answer to that was yes, that code was not getting implemented. And that just goes to show, I think, the rigorous standard that we hold ourselves to in the nuclear industry, because we're expected to be perfect in our operations and in our day-to-day life. And, if you ever get the chance, go to a nuclear power plant. If you live near one, reach out. You can see that day-to-day life, how particular they are in terms of just even walking into the power plant. A fun thing about operations and a day-to-day life when you work in a nuclear power plant is it's little things like people will tell you, hold on to the railing when you're walking up the stairs. They don't want you slipping and falling. And they don't say it to be nagging or mean or anything. It's just a safety thing. Hold on to the railing when you're walking up and down the stairs. Or, if the elevator door is closing, don't stick your hand in the door to stop it from closing. Just press the button. Like, there's a lot of little things like that safety is in our everyday lives. And it's really, really incredible. That was a really long rant. I told lots of stories there, but I love telling stories. So it's a really awesome industry though. I highly, highly recommend it.
I'm glad you tell these stories, because that's what makes it relatable to people, to actually hear the passion that you have and the experience that you have. And you're talking about the rigor of the nuclear implementation. That's one of the biggest challenges I think we're facing, honestly, to get these projects, these new nuclear projects. And when I say new nuclear, I mean small modular reactors specifically, up and running, is the rigor that it takes for approval through those compliances and regulatory commissions. So where are we at in your view of like the current implementation of new nuclear? Like, why is this taking so long? Just give us an overview of what to expect over the next 3 years.
Yeah, so for context, for what an SMR is basically a miniaturized nuclear reactor. So right now, when I say we have 94 reactors in America, they are massive structures that one power plant can power or one reactor can power around 500,000 homes and businesses, right? Small modular reactors are miniaturized. And the reason that they are kind of the future of nuclear energy is because they're a lot easier to manufacture and produce versus these massive light water reactor designs that we have been doing for the past 60 years. When you build a massive light water reactor, you're kind of custom building it to that location, to that geography, to that needs of that area, right? With these small modular reactors, the way I like to describe it is like, it's kind of like you're going to go to IKEA. You pick up a kit and you assemble on site. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more involved than that, but that's why these are so great, is because they're manufactured in a factory and you can ship it all out to the site where it needs to be built, and then they assemble it on site. And that is so much better and cheaper and more cost effective, which is one of the biggest challenges of the nuclear industry is the cost and initial investment of building new nuclear. Now, with that, I like to say that within the nuclear world, we don't really have a science problem. We have policy problems. We have we have a lot of really, really brilliant people that are always working on these challenges in terms of the scientific side, but we don't have enough people communicating and educating people and educating politicians about nuclear. Because a lot of people in office right now still have a fear of the word nuclear. And, unfortunately, that's because we had a bad first impression on the world. I think it's safe to say that, when the reality is that 95% of the nuclear industry is using the power of the atom for peaceful and prosperous purposes, whether it's curing cancer or producing clean energy or whatever it might be. So there is still a lot of fears and misconceptions and stigmas and, a lot of governmental bodies, when they were founded that regulate the nuclear industry, they hired specifically anti-nuclear people. They didn't hire people that were for the nuclear industry. They hired people against the nuclear industry that had never worked in the nuclear industry. So it's a process of now we're seeing this shift into governmental regulating bodies are becoming more pro-nuclear, and that's really exciting. And we are having conversations between industry and government to figure out what is the meet in the middle place that we can be. It's a lot of pressure on the waste obligations. It's a lot of pressure on making sure that it's tax effective for companies to build new nuclear. Like I said, it's a big capital initial investment to build new nuclear, but we've got to make the long-term investment worth it. And the government is the people that can make that happen.
It is extremely well said. I want to go into nuclear waste a little bit later, but let's talk about waste before it turns into waste. Fuel. Another very big problem that we are seeing right now is not having the access to the originally planned uranium sources from Russia. So what are we doing to really overcome that?
Right now within America, we are doing some really interesting stuff where we're using more higher enriched. We're starting to introduce what's called HALEU and LEU plus fuel. So so nuclear reactor fuel basics here, right? You have some unusual uranium and some natural uranium that's within a fuel rod and the fuel pellet, which fuel pellets are probably smaller than the top knuckle of your pinky. That's about how big they are. They're not very big. Your entire life can be powered by about the size of a soda can's worth of this nuclear fuel, which is pretty dense power, right? That's awesome. So with U2, the radioactive version of uranium versus the natural version of uranium that's within these fuel rods, we only enrich up to 5% of the radioactive and kind of like different uranium, right? Then we have the rest is made up of natural uranium. U-238 is what it is the isotope number for those curious. LEU plus fuel allows enrichment to go up to 10% then. And HALEU goes up to 20%. HALEU stands for high assay low enriched uranium, and LEU plus is low enriched uranium plus. And right now we use just LEU. So that's really exciting because what this new type of fuel enables us to do is run these plants for longer. You need less fuel in the long run because you're not refueling once a year. You're refueling maybe every other year, potentially even every 3 years, which increases reliability. It increases effectiveness and cost effectiveness of it overall as well, which is super exciting. I think in terms of uranium retrieval, I think what America needs to be doing is starting to dig and mine within our own borders and things like that. We've got plenty of opportunities. We just need to be able to be willing to take that investment. There is very little uranium mining done worldwide just because there hasn't been a need for it necessarily. But now as we're seeing this transition and we're starting to see that we need nuclear energy, that necessity is only going to become higher. So it's a market that the United States can definitely get involved in. We just have to be willing to do it.
Every question that I have, you answered throughout that entire thing. You are totally the right person to be talking about this. I have a question when it comes down to, have you been introduced to triso fuel?
I have, yes, the little spheres.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Explain to me further. From my understanding, it's they're de-weaponizing uranium. So they're taking it down from like it has to be under 20%.
Mhm.
Anything above 20% is considered weapon grade
Yep,
uranium. So
correct.
they are literally taking old weapon or uranium, which is supposed to be used for weapons, and turning it into triso fuel. Am
Yeah.
I right?
So trisofuel is just like there's some this is me doing my side of making nuclear science cool again, right? Because that's one of the things I kind of do with little kids. And trisofuel is one of those things that is just so awesome. The different uses that we'll have for it right now, actually the first research reactor in America just got their first shipment of trisofuel. I think like this week it was. So it's very timely that you brought this up. So we'll start seeing that actually be researched and used and everything. But there's a lot of different military applications for power plants right now. And there is a company that is doing some DoD contracting, and the Army asked for, hey, we want a nuclear reactor that fits inside of a shipping container. So that way we can just ship it to our Army campsites. It powers the site, you put it on a truck and you leave, or whatever it is, right? So that's just different military purposes, which okay. I'm going to tell a side story here because I want to emphasize that the military is a big leader in innovation, that they start a lot of this cool scientific stuff, but it sometimes doesn't hit the commercial industry until many years later. Now, a perfect example of that is small modular reactors. Navy submarines were powered pretty much by small modular reactors, and that's been going on for decades. And we are just starting to see SMRs enter the commercial industry. So I want to just like point that out, that we're seeing this stuff be applied in the military aspect, but I think the transition from military usage into commercial usage is going to accelerate, which is super exciting as we continue to need nuclear fuel and energy overall. But triso fuel, back to the original story here, is a really fascinating concept that it's got a lot of different applications. It's little spheres instead of cylinders because, like I said before, fuel pellets that go into reactors right now are about the size of your pinky. They're just little cylinders. I actually carry like little 3D printed cylinders with me when I go to schools. And I'm really sad that I don't have one like sitting on my desk right now. But then from there, the triso fuel transitioned it into being a sphere shape, which is just really cool in the terms of the geometry and everything like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, and I remember correctly, it's X Energy and BWXT who are the ones who are vying for this like competition for the Department of Energy or the DoD Department of
Exactly.
Defense. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so excited about that too.
Mhm.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about fuel. I really like your comment about that we hadn't really needed it before now because we hadn't had this like new nuclear renaissance until now
Mhm.
to want to start tapping into our own ore bodies here. So that makes a lot of sense to go back into where are ore bodies here in the United States and Canada and really refine mining here for our own resources. Okay, let's talk about what happens to that fuel after it's spent and how do we handle the waste?
Yeah, so right now, it's funny because I find that, a lot of people ask, well, what about the waste? And spent nuclear fuel really has 90, I mentioned before that 90 to 95% of this fuel is natural uranium, meaning we can actually separate out that natural uranium and reuse it in future fuel rods potentially. So when you take nuclear fuel out of a reactor after it's gone through 2 to 3 cycles of operating and burning and basically a nuclear reactor, you have this fuel, which is just fancy hot rocks. It boils water, the water creates steam, and the steam turns a turbine. That's a nuclear reactor. That's all what this fuel does between that start to finish, right? A great experiment that I do with kids all the time is I take a little tea kettle, and you know how like the steam shoots out the side? Your hot plate is your uranium, your fuel, and then your tea kettle is your boiler and your steam generator and all of this stuff that we have within the plant. And then you have the steam coming out. Those little plastic windmills that you have as a kid that you'd stick in your yard? Just hold that above the steam stream and like you've made your own sort of miniature power plant then. So that's a great way to visualize what happens in terms of afterwards when that fuel is taken out. Like I said, 90 to 95% of it can be reused and recycled and reprocessed. But like I said before, we don't have a science problem, we have a policy problem. So there's a lot of policy surrounding that nobody has been able to gain the permission to be able to recycle and reuse it. Initially, actually, it was back in, I believe it was the 80s, there was a president that said there will be absolutely no reprocessing, and then that was actually repealed. That was removed. So it technically is a viable option, but right now we're seeing a lot of different companies try and get that regulatory access to reprocessing and recycling, which is exciting. Countries like France, which is about 80% powered by nuclear, they reprocess and recycle all the time. It's a very, very normal thing. But right now, since we don't have that, we basically just put our spent fuel in what we call dry casks. There's a lot of really fun videos on YouTube. This is the weird corner of YouTube I end up on at 3 a.m., right? Of them testing these dry casks. I kid you not, they hit these dry casks with a train going 80 miles an hour. It's on my Twitter. Like it's pretty recent right now too. You can find the video. It like the testing stuff. Man, if I ever wanted to do testing, that's what I would want to do. I would want to test dry casks because they put these things through the most insane scenarios. I mean, this is like a 80-ton mass of concrete, and they pick it up 20 feet and drop it on its corner, and it's still fine. Like, it's just insane. So basically, we put fuel rods, we put spent fuel in there. And right now, it all stays on site at a nuclear power plant facility. So each nuclear power plant has a dry cask pad or a spent fuel pad, whatever they want to call it. And basically, they just sit there and chill, and like they're completely fine. I have a ton of pictures in front of dry casks standing right next to them. There is a nuclear, I can't think of her name right now, but it's really awesome because she was pregnant and she went and took a picture right next to a dry cask, and it went viral and everything because people were like, you can do that? And it's like, yep, it's normal. It's completely fine. So all the radiation is contained. It's a really cool engineering process to see how those dry casks work and everything. And it's just, like I said, the testing procedure, tons of fun to look it up on YouTube. Dry cask testing, look it up right now. It's awesome.
So I love that we have, it sounds like a fuel source, a bunch of dry casks that are already sitting at conventional nuclear power plants that once we get the policy in place to recycle, we have access to that fuel as well. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
I mean, it depends on how the policy is set up, but I'm assuming once we get to that day when we can reprocess and recycle, that they would be able to use those spent fuel rods that have been sitting there for 50, 60 years now. That's something that's completely fine. And there's a lot of other different applications and uses for these spent fuel rods too. You know, I mentioned earlier, nuclear medicine is huge, right? You could probably piece a lot of those isotopes out from that spent fuel and use it to cure cancer in some way, use it to help with medical imaging. Like there's so many different applications of isotopes in the medicine world. I'm not an expert in that. I'm certainly nowhere close to an expert in that, but that's like a whole other thing that opens up so many doors.
I'm never going to look at nuclear fuel again other than those fancy rocks. Thanks, Grace.
It's fancy hot rocks. Yeah.
Fancy hot rocks. Well, Grace, I would love to hear your opinion on how can we become better advocates for nuclear, we as the public. How can we go out, other than learning and listening to things like this podcast here, how can we become the best nuclear advocates?
My ask of everybody, and this has been my ask all year long as Miss America, I want you to start your family Thanksgiving fight. You know, like just cause a little chaos. My favorite thing, ask your Aunt Linda, you know, where do you get your power from? Because it's something that it's not just about nuclear energy. This discussion isn't just about nuclear. There is so many people that pay their utility bills. They don't question a single thing about where their power is coming from. Some people don't even know who they are paying their utility bills to. They just log onto their portal and they click pay and that's it, right? And that's something that people shouldn't have that background knowledge of, okay, you know, is my home being powered by solar, wind, nuclear, hydro, fossil fuels? What is it? And there is sometimes a lot of different options that power providers are allowing now where if you say, hey, I want a solar panel, you could get a solar panel for free too now. That's pretty common amongst most different utility providers. because they want to reduce their carbon emissions too. And it's something that's really, really awesome to see. And starting that conversation, not just about energy and electricity, but talking about nuclear. We've got to fight this battle of this misconception surrounding the word nuclear. And the best way to do that is, like I said, start your family Thanksgiving fight. That's my big ask. And make sure that when you see a cooling tower, know that it's a cloud machine. It's not anything other than that. It's a cloud machine.
Oh my gosh, Grace, I am relating to you so hard right now because how I've come up with the nickname between my family as the corporate hippie coming from oil and gas generation and converting into power generation is I started the Thanksgiving fight.
I love it. Snaps. All about it. All about it.
Oh, Grace, I am so proud of you. I'm so thankful for you, and I'm so thankful for your time today. I I would love to just say continue representing just as you are. Your leadership is astounding at the age that you currently are right now. Are you 22 yet? Or you just turned 21, right?
I'm 21 right now. Yeah. Yeah.
You're my role model. You are.
Aw.
You are. And
You?
I am so thankful to have my girls like look up to you. And when we watch the videos again, and especially this one here, I'm gonna be like, this is who you can be too. And to step
Aw.
into that role wholeheartedly like you have, I am proud of you and I thank you so much and just ask that you continue to keep doing what you're doing. That being said, everybody listening, stay happy. Most importantly, stay safe. And Grace, please close us out, ma'am.
Oh, I mean, I like stay happy and stay safe. Find joy and hold on to it.
Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook and connect with me, Marsha Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become.